Um, what an awesome morning. What an awesome God, guys. Good morning. Great to be here as well. And welcome from me. A big shout out to the mums as well. Happy Mother's Day on Mothering Sunday. Now, as a church, we've been going through the Book of Jonah, and today we're getting to the last chapter. We've only got 3 weeks left, and we're going to be asking the greatest theological question you will ever ask, and it's this. Huh? What? It's kind of like Jonah. He's got to the pinnacle of his prophet career. You see, you've got the Ninevites, and these awful people have done a massive U-turn to God and repented. God's shown them mercy, and Jonah gets the hump. And you're like, what? And so we're picking up end of chapter 3, verse 10, and we're going through to 4, verse 3. It says this. When God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction he had threatened. But to Jonah, this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord, "Isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? That is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger, abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live." And two things we're going to unpack. We'll go quite quick. I'll try and keep it short. But two things we're just going to look at is this. Firstly, Jonah's heart. And secondly, God's heart. The Father's heart came up a bit through the verse which B read out. And if we're looking at Jonah's heart, today after a number of weeks, you start to see the state of Jonah's heart. It says he is angry. Other translations say he was furious, lost his temper, flew into a rage, that he was like, God, this is utterly wrong. He was very upset, extremely displeased. If you were to say it today, you would say he lost the plot. He threw his toys out. He had a wobble. And you're like, why? Why? And the reason is he was a Jew and he hated the Assyrians. So much so, he didn't want God to save them. And you start to see the surface kind of racism, this nationalism, this bigotry kind of bubbling up in Jonah. And he goes, God, I told you this. He says, I knew this would happen. You're too nice. You're too forgiving. I knew this would happen. That's why I ran away. I wasn't scared of going to Nineveh. What I was afraid of is that you would save the people I don't like. And he goes, I didn't like that plan. I didn't want to be part of that plan. I am not happy. And you see, Jonah hated who God loved. And it says in James 1:8, it says this, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. Goes on, blowing and tossed by the wind. And this guy, Jonah, he's a bit of a wobbly man. He is pretty unstable. He is double-minded. He goes from praising God in chapter 2 to a few verses later, a few days later, wanting to die. And the Greek word for double-minded is a word called dipsychos, which means two-spirited. It means two-souled. It's like having a split heart, or it's like having a divided heart. And Jonah, his heart was split in two places. He was running after two things. A bit like Rach said in the worship, we want to have one God. Jonah, he was worshiping two gods. And his other God was the national security of his people in Israel. He wanted that so much so, he wanted to protect that he wanted to see these dirty pagans, he wanted them to be nuked by God. And that was important to him. But you see what happens is we hold up this mirror and we can see Jonah's heart. But you know what? I've seen that in my life sometimes when I look in that mirror and there's that thing I've been praying for or that thing I've been putting my hope in, And when that doesn't happen, I've responded like Jonah sometimes, where I'll get angry and I'll get frustrated. And that thing I am chasing after, I don't know what it is for you, if it's a relationship, if it's money, if it's acceptance, if it's a career, if it's approval, if it's a job, if it's husband, wife, children, whatever it is, that thing becomes your Lord. And it says in the Bible, God often says he wants to give us a pure heart. It says that aloud. God, give me a pure heart. Give me a pure heart. But a pure heart does not mean a perfect heart. You see, the opposite of a pure heart is a divided heart. It's a heart chasing after something other than God. And God is saying, I want to be the one you run after. I want to be the one you love. I want to have 100% of you. And so if that's Jonah's heart and a little bit of our heart, well, what's the answer? And the only way to heal a divided heart or a broken heart is for God to perform heart surgery. For him to come and reveal his heart to us. Like B said, the father who shows compassion on his kids. And two things where I think the heart of God comes up so clearly in the Bible is A, at the cross, and B, with the story of the prodigal son. And we're just going to touch on those two. So, you see, for those of you who know me, I love running. Hands up if we have got any runners here at Eastern Church this morning. Hands up. Okay, there we go. A bit of an unfit church. There we go. London Marathon coming up in just over a month. Even less. Hands up if you've run a marathon before in your life. There we go. The serious people. Okay, these are the guys, 26.2 miles. Some of you don't even like driving that far. But these guys, they love running at 26.2 miles. And we're going to go on a journey through races this morning. You see, 2 years ago, there was this experiment in Austria, Vienna, to see could a human being run a marathon in under 2 hours. And this legend, he is an Ethiopian called Eliud Kipchoge. He ran a marathon in 1 hour, 59 minutes, 40 seconds. And if you know anything about running pace, his pace for that race was 4 minute 35 second miles or 2 minute 51 second kilometers for the entire race. But you see, it didn't count because this was a staged race. It was set up to make him succeed. He had this V of runners in the front of him. It was a flat course. There were no turns. He had motorbikes bringing him water, but he is an absolute legend. Let's go back a little bit. 1954, it was, Oxford. There's another race. And a guy called Roger Bannister, the first guy to break the 4-minute mile, and he ran it 3 minutes, 59.4 seconds for a mile. Didn't hold it for long. It's been broken, and now a Moroccan, actually, 1999, he's held it 3 minutes 43 seconds. These guys are quick. But what I want to do, I want to go back 2,000 years to another race. It was called the Jerusalem 1000. It's 30 AD. It's Easter Sunday, early morning, and this race starts, which we're going to read about in John chapter 20. And as we read this, a bit of Bible comedy, the guy writing this is called John, and he refers to himself as the other disciple, as you'll see through this. So we'll pick it up and you'll see what I mean. It says this: early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, a.k.a. John, the one Jesus loved. John just putting that in there and said, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb and we don't know where they've put him. So Peter and the other disciple, a.k.a. John, started for the tomb. Both were running. But the other disciple, aka John, outran Peter, and he reached the tomb first. John, not so subtly saying he was the fastest of the two of them. He gets there. And you see, John and Peter, they have this sprint. Probably about 1,000 meters from where they were staying to where the tomb was. They're ducking and they're diving and they're weaving through the streets of Jerusalem. John gets there first, and when he gets there, he finds that the tomb is empty. That Jesus has already moved. And like the Ninevites with the God of second chances, the story is, it is not how hard you run and how fast you run to get to the tomb or to get to Jesus. The story is Jesus has already moved before you decide to get to him. And when you decide you need a savior, he has already run the most remarkable race needed to save you. Because we are coming to the God of second chances and third chances and fourth chances this morning. And the final race, which I want to look at, we see the heart of the Father so beautifully in the story of the prodigal son. It's a story you might know well. It's in Luke 15, but if you don't, it's the story of a boy, a Jewish boy, and he took his father's money, his inheritance, he left home, and he went and had an absolute blast, crazy time. He had a wild time with parties, and eventually he loses every single bit of money he's got. And one day when he is in the lowest of the low, he decides, I am going to go back to my father. I am going to go back to my dad. And he starts to get the speech ready in his head. I think we've got it on screen. And he says, Father, I have sinned against heaven and you. Make me a servant. I have sinned against heaven and you. Make me a servant. But you see, this isn't the first time in the Bible these words appear. They first appear in Exodus 10 when Pharaoh is negotiating with Moses to get rid of the plague. And he's using these words of sinned against heaven and you to negotiate. And so the son is coming and he thinks he needs to do the same, that the only way the Father will accept me is if I work for it, if I earn it, if I deserve it, if I pay him back. I need to negotiate with my Father. And so he makes his way home. But we read, while he was a while off, the Father saw him, had compassion on him, and then what does it say? He ran to his son. You see, another grace. But you see, the thing with this story is we often look at it and read it through Western eyes. We don't look at it through the eyes of the time, Palestinian culture, Palestinian eyes. And you see, in Middle Eastern culture, no one in the position of the Father would have ever run in public. To do so, he would have had to tuck his robe into his belt. He would have had to expose his legs, his knees, and his ankles, and that would have been disrespectful at the time. It would have embarrassed the village where he came from. But this father, he couldn't care less. He sees his son and he tucks his robe into his belt, and it says that he sprints to his son. Now, I don't know what you picture when you read this. Maybe like me, you'd pictured a nice long drive, trees on the side, father sitting on a porch, gate down the end, little picket fence, son comes walking in. But you see, that's a very Western way to look at this story. Because back in the time of Jesus, people lived in gated communities. The village, it was a collective, not the individual. The whole reputation of the village would have been at stake. And there was a ceremony back then which was known as kizaza. Kizaza. And an author, Kenneth Bailey, who writes a lot about seeing the gospel through Middle Eastern eyes, he says that back then, the Talmud, which was the Jewish law, and it went all the way back to the days of Moses. It said that if a Jewish boy left home and lost property among the Gentiles, or was with someone the village didn't approve of, if he wanted to come back home, he had to come to the gate of the village and face the kazaza. And you see, the ceremony would have been led by the elders of the village. The dad wasn't allowed to come because a father's blessing trumped the community decisions. It's a culture where the father's blessing trumped community decisions. And so the elders would be there and they would decide this boy's fate. And as he comes in, the elders would hear the boy out, and if they decided kazaza, it's a word which literally means cut off, they would pick up a clay pot and they would smash it at the feet of the son and say, go. You are now cut off. You are now banished. You are no longer allowed back in our village. You have disgraced us. You have embarrassed us. Off you go. And so the son was coming back knowing that not only did he need to face his father and convince his father, but he likely had to face kazaza, the ceremony, and he's coming back and he's got this pre-prepared speech in his head. I have sinned against heaven and you. I have sinned against heaven and you. I need to work my way out of it. I need to pay my way out of it. But you see, the dad had word his son was coming home. The dad was watching the road. Why? Because the dad knew he had to get to the boy before the boy got to kazaza. The dad knew he had to get to the boy before the boy got to the gate of the village. And he tucks up his robe and he sprints. And he gets to the boy, and it says he puts his arm around him. He puts a robe on his back. He puts a ring on his finger. He puts shoes on his feet. He says, this is my son. He was dead, but he is now alive. He was lost, but now he is found. And the father's blessing trumped kazaza. So when the boy gets to the village, he is walking in, and he has the robe of his father's family. He has got the ring of his father's authority. He is walking in shoes which elevated him among the culture of the time, because sons wore shoes, slaves wore bare feet. And he is walking into this village, and this boy, he didn't get kazaza, he got a party. And he got the father's compassion, and he got the father's grace, and he got the father's love. And you see, to finish up, the amazing thing, this is a picture of what Jesus has done for you. This is a picture of the race he has run for you and the second chance he bought for the Ninevites and he has bought for us today. Because you see, as Jesus hung on the cross, he was literally cut off from the Father. He got kazaza, so much so he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? And the Father stood there above his Son, and he held the clay pot of my sin, and he held the clay pot of your sin, and he thrust it at the feet of Jesus. And he smashed it at his Son. And he said, through my Son's death on the cross, he's going to be cut off, so that every single one of us here today can get the open arms of the Father. And we can get the open arms of the Father. Jesus got kazaza. We got a second chance. And you see, God is the first mover in this story. Before the Ninevites knew they needed a second chance. The day you decide you need a savior. The day you decide your life is not working out, the day you decide you've been chasing after gods other than the true God, you're not going to catch God off guard because he has already moved and he is ready for you. You see, it says in the Bible, each of us one day we will die. And it goes on and it says, each of you one day will sit in the judgment seat before God. And we will be asked to give an account of our lives. And if you think you can do a Pharaoh speech, if you think you can negotiate with God, okay, God, sorry about that, I forgot about that, I did this, oh yeah, I knew that, sorry, God, well, hey, think again. Because God is holy. And that is why he had to run. He sent his son Jesus running to the cross so that when you and I get to the gate of heaven, we can walk through that gate of heaven with his robe on our back, his ring on our finger, the gospel shoes of peace on my feet, and I can walk through the gate of heaven covered by the Father's blessing, because the Father's blessing trumps Kazaza and his grace covers my sin. You see, this morning we come to the God of second chances. And if you're here and you think you don't deserve a second chance, let me tell you this. You didn't deserve the first one you got either. If you're there, you think you don't deserve a third chance, fourth chance, don't worry. He has come for us. And the message of Jonah, and the message of the Ninevites, and the message of Kazaza is that you cannot earn, work for, or deserve God's acceptance. His arms are not too short to save. You are never too far gone, and there is nothing you can do or have done that will put you out of reach of God. You see, you are accepted because of what he has done, not what you do. You are accepted because of his grace, not your works. You are accepted by a God who has grace which floods like a river, his mercy so undeserving. It is his strength, not your weakness. It says he is gracious and compassionate. It says he is slow to anger. He is abounding in love. And we're going to finish and just sing one song. Rach band, if you don't mind just popping up to the front. And I just want to use this time just to finish off. I hope you have seen the compassion of a Father who loves you. A God of second chances. And I know some of you here, this might be the first time you've heard that. And you know what? You're like, 19th of March, 2023, I am going to make this the day that I accept what Jesus has done for me. I cannot earn it. My life is not working out. Jesus, I want you. For others of you here, you're just feeling a bit hung down by guilt and condemnation, by that stuff you keep messing up on. Well, know what? His blood has covered that. And the answer is Jesus. The Father has sent him sprinting to earth to cover whatever we've done. So guys, I just encourage you to stand. I encourage you as we sing this song and anything that has come up through the service today, just hold out your hands, speak to him, talk to him, because he's got ears that are available to hear. Rach.